Shabbat Shalom, Parashat Chukat, the red cow. Why do we need a red cow for? We need a red cow to purify ourselves from the death, from contact with death. Why do we need to purify ourselves from a contact with death? And why death is not pure? What makes it not pure? Isn't it natural as much as life? The sages say, against our will, we are brought to life, and against our will, we are brought out of life. If both are from God, then why do we need to purify ourselves from it? And perhaps, according to Torah, we can understand death was not supposed to happen. In Torah, death, it's an accident, it's an anomaly in nature. The original nature of man was not supposed to include death. It is a consequence from the original sin. So obviously, now we understand why do we need to purify ourselves from it. The korban, the sacrifice of the red cow, was not made inside the temple. It was an act in relation with the temple, but it was made outside the temple in exact direct line between the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holy, the holiest place of the entire world for the Jews, and the Mount of Olives, Har HaZeitim. Today, archaeologists think that they have found the exact spot where the korban of the paraduma was made, according to the exact description the sages of our Mishnah are teaching us. Why this is important? Well, because perhaps very soon when Mashiach will come, we will be able to make the korban of paraduma, of the red cow again. Why do we need that for? We will need it to purify ourselves from our contact with death, so we can enter the space of the temple in purity, and we could enter the time of Mashiach in purity. How was that sacrifice made? We took a cow. Now, the bull and the cow were the most important animal among the domesticated animal at the time. Obviously, we also had camels. In the Far East, they had elephants. But the most productive, the most important, the most valuable for an agricultural society was the bull and the cow for their size and their strength. But the cow is more important because the cow gives life. It will give life to a calf. And so the cow represents something of life, of the most important animal. The red cow, red is the color of life, not only any life, is the color of life with passion, with intensity. What would we put together with the cow? We would put wood of cedar. Now, cedar wood is the tallest and most important tree in the Middle East. So you see, we are taking the largest and the most important tree, the most important animal of the area, and we are taking the tallest and the most important vegetal of the area. Both of them, we are burning them entirely. We are not taking anything out of that cow. We are not keeping anything for ourselves. Everything is burnt. Is burnt until it becomes ashes. Now, in that fire, when it's burning, we are putting two things. One is what is called in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, ezov, Aesop, or in a more known term, the zatar. Zatar is a very small bush, is the smallest tree of that area. And we also put a thread of wool colored with porphyr, which is a very deep red. Now that color was extracted from a worm. So you see the worm is the smallest animal, and it represents what will become from us after we are being dead. And all of these are being burned to ash. So we take the largest living creature, living animal, the largest living vegetal, the smallest living animal, and the smallest vegetal, and we are burning them, and all of it becomes ash. What are we doing with that now? Well, first of all, we understand what it represents. All of life, from the biggest to the smallest, even the worm that will become our body once we are dead, everything is burned. It is the burning of life itself. the cow, the red, everything. So what do we do now with this? Now that life entirely has been symbolically burned to ash, well, we need to make the resurrection of the dead. So how do we do that? Well, the next step in the korban, in the sacrifice, is to throw these ashes, and we put it into living water in the recipient. Living water represents water that is untouched by anyone but nature. It could come from the rain, it could come from a river, it could come from subterranean river. It's the pure natural water as the world gives it. What is the living water in a recipient represents? It represents the soul into a body. The soul being the infinite living force, the body being the recipient of that soul. And once we are putting it in that, we have symbolically destroyed or undone or purified the burning of life. And we have now initiated a process of resurrection of the death. Not the resurrection of the dead, but resurrection of the death itself. All that is very important. Why that is very important? And more importantly, what is so secretive then about the red cow? If it's so simple, why our sages have said that this is the most secretive and not understood mitzvah of the entire Torah? The sages of all men, the wisest of all men, Shlomo the King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech said, I've understood all the mitzvot, but this one is so far removed from me. Even the parasha itself is called Chukat. Chukat means a law, but not any law. It means a law that is just a decree that is not understandable. We're doing it only because God, the King, has ordered us to do it. We don't understand it. Now, if we were able to explain it so fast, in a few minutes, clearly, what's so secretive about it? What's so deep about it? And what's so mystical about it? Well, the very thing that we said is the very thing that is not understood. Because how do we transition between death to life and between life to death? The sacrifice acted makes the symbol of it, but how the effect in reality takes place. Job says, the one that can purify the impure is only the unified, meaning God is the only one who unites life and death in the same place, and therefore is able to purify the death. But us, how can we do that? Now, this is not only about death and life, it's about existing and not existing. The transition between the non-created and the created, the ex nihilo, having something that becomes when there was nothing before. This is something that only God has the ability to. He is the only creator. We are only formator. We take wood and we make tables and chairs out of it. We are not creating anything. And in fact, this is the great secret of Paraduma, how we are able to do it. But then comes another question. Why do we need to tell us that mitzvah now? Why that mitzvah was not told to us the first time that a death was encountered in Torah? Now we know that when they had the Paschal, the sacrifice of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, there were people with the impurity of death. And they asked to have a second chance for a second Pesach. So we know that people already had encountered that problem in the desert. Why the Torah waste so much time to give us that law? And perhaps there is something that it's kind of unnoticed when we read the Torah, but it's worthwhile pointing at it, because it would shine light not only to that particular point, but to the rest of the text until the end of the Torah. Between the last week's parasha, Parashat Chukat, and this week's parasha, there is a gap of 38 years. Everything that happened in the Torah, since the second book of Exodus until last week's parasha, Korach, all the stories that happened to the Jews in the desert in the first 2 years of their liberation from Egypt. Now, we are skipping straight to the 40th year. Now, why is that important? Well, it's very important because it will allow us to understand the very characteristic of everything that appears in the stories that are told before and the stories that appear now and the other parashat will come along. All the stories that we saw before were very much internal stories. What I mean by internal stories? Internal politics, internal problem, internal to Israelis, to Israelites, to Hebrews, to Bnei Israel. So we had Miriam talking about her brother. We had the Jews complaining about the meat. We had the Jews complaining about the water. We had the deviant woman. We had the person who transgressed the Shabbat. Everything was very internal. Even the golden calf, it's something that is internal to the Jews. The giving of the Torah was for the Jews. And so there's a very specific characteristic to this part of the Torah. From this parasha and on, skipping 38 years ahead and reaching to the 40th year, we are now starting to talk about a new generation. It's the generation that will enter the land of Israel. And when the Jews start to enter the land of Israel, get ready for it, starts now the meeting between the Jewish nation and the nations of the world. And this encounter, this meeting between Am Israel, Bnei Israel, and the nations of the world is the moment and the time where the mission of the Jewish people becomes universal. So the universal aspect of the Exodus of Egypt starts to appear in our parasha. Everything that happened before was very much internal stories that were necessary to allow Israel to grow until they can come to that universal stage. But this is where the real story starts. And this is why right after we will see in our parasha topics that seems totally unrelated to it. The stories are the first attempt of the Jews to enter the land of Israel. That attempt has first started with Edom. The land of Edom is the land of southern Jordan today. And Edom are the descendant of Esav. Esav being the brother of Yaakov, the brother of Israel. So technically we are asking our brother, please allow us to cross your land so we can get to our own land. Edom said no. Moshe concedes. Under the order of Hashem, God tells them, do not enter in war with Edom. Go around. So although it makes the trip much longer, but Moshe with the Jews will go up north until the north of Jordani, close to the border with Syria and Iraq, actually closer to Syria and the Golan Heights, and they will try to enter through there. And there you have two other kingdoms, the mighty giants, Sichon and Og. And there again, the Jews will send messengers and ask the king, can we cross your land? And Sichon says again, no. And not only he says no, but he starts to wage war against them. For fear that they will attack first, he attacks first. Moshe makes the war, wins the war, conquers the land of Sichon and conquers the land of Og, which would be today the northern part of Israel, Transjordanian, and the Golan Heights, those territories. So that would be actually the first conquest. Now, the relationship with that phase of Israel to the previous phase of Israel also represents a transition between not only two generations, but two different types of leadership. And we will see that in a very subtle difference that the Torah mentions. When Moshe sends messengers to Edom, the Torah says Moshe sent messengers. When Moshe sent messengers to Sichon, the Torah says Israel sent messengers to Sichon. And Rashi right away, the commentaries, and Rashi brings it up. He says Israel sent. Why not Moshe? So Rashi says no. When the Torah says Israel, it means Moshe, because Moshe, as a leader of the Jews, He is the entire nation. The Prince of Israel is Israel. So now, if both times Moshe was the one who sent the messengers, why when he sent the messengers to Edom, Moshe was mentioned? And why when Moshe sent the messengers to Sichon, it was mentioned that Israel did it? And perhaps what we just said before will explain that. There is a transition in time, not only in generation, but in the whole formation of the Jewish people. When they had to go through Edom, they were still in Galut, they were in the desert. And being in a desert, you have to start and ask permission. And you need to follow the politics of the time. And if it says no, it's not comfortable, but you go around. But when it was about getting into the land through the north, where there was no objection because he was not the brother of Yaakov, so then it's about conquering our land. And here, when the conquest of Israel, of their own land, starts, Israel has its own right to conquer. Because Am Yisrael did not receive the promise of the land through Moshe Rabbeinu. It received it directly from God. And this is perhaps the most important transition we see in our parasha. And perhaps the most important part of the shiur. It's that in the conquest of Israel, of the Jews to Israel, there are two stages. The first is a military and political stage. The second is a spiritual stage. The political and military battle will start in our parasha. We will fight, we will win, and we will conquer. The spiritual part of the task will happen in the next week's parasha with the famous story of Bilam and Balak. We'll talk about it next week. The second aspect of it is the place that the tzaddik takes in the Jewish people. When the Jews are in exile, the tzaddikim are the most important thing the Jews have. They are the anchor, they are the eyes of the nation, they are our guide, they are our spirit, they are our soul. But when the Jews are entering their land, they own their own spirituality. In the land of Israel, never we had a leader as revered as Moshe Rabbeinu. We had very strong leaders, we have very important prophets. But oh God, as we know, they have been persecuted, they have been hunted, they have been in so many controversies, not always accepted. Moshe was also very much challenged, but he was the uncontested leader. When we went to exile, the Jews again started to look up towards the tzaddikim. But in the time of the land of Israel, when we lived in Israel with the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash, Jews looked up to the Beit HaMikdash. Jews looked up to Hashem directly. The tzaddikim were only helping us, guiding us in times of error. But if someone would have wanted a real godly inspiration, an awakening of his soul, a sense of intimacy with God, he would just walk to the temple. He would have it in front of his eyes. Miracles were obvious, visible. The holiness was palpable. Anyone would walk into the temple, would walk out changed, closer to his soul, closer to God. And perhaps this is why in our parasha we see that Miriam passes away. We also see that Aaron passes away, and Moshe Rabbeinu is being announced, he will not enter the land. Meaning that it has to be not only a change of generation, but a change of leadership. Not that the leadership we had in the desert was not good, it was the holiest we ever had. But when Jews are entering the land of Israel, Jews become their own master, their own owner of their own spirituality. We will need Kohanim, we will need Rabbanim, and we will need Nevi'im. We will need priests, prophets, and guides, and sages. But the relationship that the Jews can have with Hashem in the land of Israel is so close and so intimate, it needs much less clarification through the tzaddikim. This is the most important difference that will start from our parasha on and the entire Torah we have until now. Another difference that we'll see that illustrates that exact point is that at the end of the conquest of Sichon and Og, there is the famous song that the Jews sang about the pit. And the way the Torah says it is, Az Yashir Israel, And then Bnei Israel, the nation of Israel, sang. Now you remember when we crossed the Red Sea, the Jews also sang. But then the Torah said, Az Yashir Moshe uVnei Israel. And then sang Moshe, the Tzaddik, and Bnei Israel. Obviously, in both times, Moshe and the Jews sang together. But the importance of the Tzaddik is far greater in times of exile than when they are entering the land of Israel. And this is why the song now takes the name of Israel. The Parah Adumah now, the red cow sacrifice, takes the entirety of, we understand the entire meaning of it. Jews are purifying themselves in order not only to purify themselves from death, but to purify themselves from exile. The purity of exile through the ash of the burning of life, the ash that represented burning of all life from the greatest to the simplest. So much ash, so much destruction, so much death, but this symbol of death and destruction of life itself is being resurrected through the living water in the recipient, the soul in its vessel. Jews are also a soul. The entirety of the Jewish people is a soul. And what is their vessel? The vessel of the Jewish people is the land of Israel. When the Jews are entering the land of Israel, the soul enters its body. The collective soul of Israel enters the collective body of Israel. I will not say that knowing it. I don't know it. I don't guess it. I'm thinking out loud. It just makes me thinking about it. When I'm thinking about life that is being burned to ash, from the greatest to the smallest, everything is being burned together without any distinction. And that being the process that purifies the Jews from their times of exile to the time of them entering the land of Israel, I cannot not think about some of the events of the 20th century and about the collective soul of Israel entering the collective body of Israel, which is Am Yisrael returning to its land. I don't know if that is true. I actually have no idea. But if there is something true in it, I would say none of them died for nothing, because they were part of the rebirth of the Jewish nation, and them themselves will be part of their resurrection. Like the Nevuah, the prophecy of Yechezkel, the prophet Ezekiel, when he prophesied about the Jews going back to their land, he prophesied about the dry bones resurrecting from their grave and walking to the gates of Jerusalem. He prophesied, he associated in his prophecy between the resurrection of the dead and the return of Israel into its land. All of that can only allow us to think perhaps we're living very historical moments. Perhaps what our parents and grandparents and ancestors have dreamed and prayed and cried and hoped for 2,000 years of exile. We are so lucky to be in that specific point of history. In 100 to 200 years, people will totally take it for granted. No doubt that the Jews will grow in Israel and live in Israel won't remember the exile the way we are. We are exactly at that same point where our parasha is, leaving exile, entering into our land, resurrecting our nation, resurrecting our land, resurrecting our soul collectively, all together. Shabbat Shalom.